Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining me for the study of this week's portion. Today we're studying the portion of Pinchas. We're going to be studying from selections of Likutei Sichos, the second portion for Pinchas. Just a short introduction. This week's portion is one of the longest. It includes all the Jewish holidays, and it includes a very special reward for Pinchas and his descendants. But among other topics that are mentioned, there is the respect and honor we give women. We find about a man who died for whatever reason, and he had only daughters, 5 daughters. And they came to Moshe demanding a share in the Holy Land. They wanted a portion in the Holy Land. And Moshe said, I don't know, let's ask God. And God says they are correct. And God agreed with them, and therefore they are going to get a share in the Holy Land. What's interesting is immediately thereafter, God is giving us all the laws that apply to inheritance. Who inherits what? I just want to share with you a just point of interest, which is usually the dead gives over to the living. A father who died, the children inherit the father. If there are no children, the brothers. If there are no brothers, then the father. And then if there is no father, the uncles, and it goes on. In the desert, before they enter the Holy Land, the inheritance worked the opposite. The living gave the dead, which means if a man had 5 children, each one, when they enter, each one gets one portion, and then it goes back to the father, even if the father is dead, and then it's divided equally among the other brothers. In other words, my grandfather, if I enter the Holy Land, I get a portion. My other brother gets a portion. Once we know our portion, it goes back to my father, and for my father, it goes to my grandfather. And for my grandfather, it's divided equally to the rest of the grandchildren. So as Rashi says, the living, people who are alive, give over a portion in the Holy Land to the dead, to people who are dead, and then it splits. This was very unusual, very unique situation. However, all the laws that apply to inheritance in general are derived from this week's portion because of Tzlofchad's daughter. Tzlofchad had 5 daughters, and they came and demanded, and based on that, God continues on with the requirements or the rules that apply to inheritance. We are, right, just a minute. We are going to go, so to say, on a side note, but then we'll see the Kabbalah understanding of inheritance in a very beautiful way. It's a very long discussion, and there are many, many topics that are covered, and I'm going to try and sift through just to one specific topic that I want to get to. So let's start reading. When enumerating the mitzvot at the beginning of the Mishnah Torah, and similarly in the Sefer HaMitzvot, Rambam, Maimonides, lists as the final positive commandment the charge to judge the laws concerning inheritance, as it is written, when a man dies without a son. Rambam lists all 613 commandments. They are divided into positive commandment and negative commandment, prohibitions. In the positive commandments, we have 248 commandments. The last one is inheritance. As the Rebbe, it is well known that Rambam structured his work in extremely precise order. Rambam, one word or one letter is very precise. He did not do it just because it came in the alphabetical order or the way it's written in the Torah. There is a reason one commandment comes next to the other. Thus, it can be presumed that the placement of the commandment concerning the laws of inheritance as the final positive commandment was deliberate, indicating that these laws embody the most apt conclusion to the positive commandments. If he puts it as last, must be it's very important and is all inclusive of all of them. Usually when you conclude something, you summarize, you sum up everything that you studied before. And therefore, if he puts it as last, there must be that it's all inclusive of all the previous 247 commandments. Similar logic applies to Rambam's choice of the first positive commandment, which is to know that there is a God, as it is written, I am God, your Lord. What's the first positive commandment? Not the first positive commandment that appears in the Torah, which is to sanctify the minds, but rather to believe in God, because that's the foundation. You believe in God, you obey God. So it's the first commandment. In other words, there is a reason for the way he put the list of the commandments. The reason for that choice is obvious. It is the first and the most fundamental of all the mitzvot that follow, as Rambam writes in the beginning of Mishnah Torah, the foundation of all foundations and the pillar of all knowledge is to know that there is a primary being. Rambam emphasizes the prominence of this mitzvah when listing the mitzvot in his introduction, referring to as the first mitzvah. In other words, the same thing, likewise, it is understood that the choice of the final positive commandment, the mitzvah, judge the laws concerning inheritance, is precise. He selected it because its message is appropriate to finish and conclude the reckoning of all the mitzvot, the positive mitzvot. In other words, just like the first mitzvah I put in the most important one, the foundation of everything else, it must be that the last one that he put as last is because it's a summary of all the other previous commandments. And now the Rebbe wants to understand why. At first glance, the reason for concluding with the mitzvah can be explained as follows. All of the other mitzvot are to be fulfilled during a person's lifetime. By contrast, the mitzvah of inheritance applies only after a person's lifetime. Therefore, Rambam lists the mitzvah as the last and as the conclusion of all the mitzvot. One can answer, you know why? Because what is the law of inheritance? It's after the person dies. Therefore, he cannot fulfill it himself. It's the last one because it's done after the lifetime of the person. There is no other mitzvah that he can perform. But the Rebbe says that this is a very forced explanation for two reasons. First, there are several other mitzvot which Rambam mentions previously that involve a person's death. There are many mitzvot that happens after a lifetime of a person and matters that follow it. Furthermore, the mitzvah of inheritance is not incumbent on the person himself, but rather upon the Jewish court. It is the responsibility to judge the laws of inheritance, as the Rambam explains in detail when discussing these laws. In the Mishnah Torah, it clarifies the order of inheritance according to which the court adjudicates the division of the estate among the living heirs. It is readily apparent that this mitzvah does not concern itself with the deceased. Therefore, it is not appropriate to explain that it is listed last in the order of the mitzvot because it is connected with the passing of the testator. Says the Rebbe, there are two reasons that's not a good answer. The first is there are many other commandments that apply after the person dies, and they are not listed last. And number two, the mitzvah of the inheritance is a mitzvah incumbent on the court. The Jewish court has the obligation to make sure it's divided accordingly, not the person who dies. And therefore, they're still alive. And it's a mitzvah that the court has to do like other mitzvot. And therefore, it's not a reason to put it last because it's at the end of a person's life.
If the guy leaves a will, then it's up to the court.
It's up to the court. It's part of the inheritance. So according to Rambam, the way he explains in Mishnah Torah, the laws of inheritance, the obligation is on the court, not on the family or not on the deceased.
No matter what he writes, the courts take over?
The courts always, no, the court is the executor. The court makes sure that whatever his wishes were are carried out. If there are no wishes, we have rules. He puts the rules. He's the one in charge. If he did not put the rules, or there was an accident, for example, then the court is standing instead of him. But the point is, it cannot be said to be the last of the 248 commandments because a person cannot do it on his lifetime, but it happens after his lifetime. It's not true. A, there are many other commandments that are done after lifetime, and B, it's a mitzvah incumbent on the court, not on the deceased, and therefore it should not be a reason. The Rebbe is asking other questions. We're going to continue and skip it. The Rebbe says that we continue on page 432 in the middle. It is possible to say that Rambam's conclusion of the listing of the positive mitzvot with the mitzvah of to judge the laws of inheritance resembles the conclusion of the 6 orders of Mishnah. The Mishnah we have is divided to 6 categories. The last one of the 6 categories talks about inheritance, which states, in the ultimate future, the Holy One, blessed be He, will bestow an inheritance upon every tzaddik, as it is written, to endow those who love me with an inheritance of substance. There are commentators who explain that the Mishnah concludes with this teaching specifically because it speaks of the reward for the observance of the Torah and its mitzvot, a reward that comes after the conclusion of the completion of the study of Torah and the fulfillment of its mitzvot. The Mishnah is precise in its wording. In the ultimate future, meaning after Mashiach, the Holy One, blessed be He, will bestow an inheritance, because the reward which comes after the conclusion of one's service of the Torah and its mitzvot is the inheritance that will be granted in the future era. It is possible to say that similar concepts apply to the passage from the Mishnah Torah under discussion. Rambam concludes with the mitzvah concerning inheritance because the conclusion and completion of all the mitzvot of the Torah is connected with the concept of inheritance as stated above. So says the Rebbe, in the simple, we call it a nigla. In the simple explanation, we can say it that it's compared to the Mishnah. If you study the Mishnah, there are 6 categories. How does the Mishnah conclude all the 6 categories? It talks about an inheritance, that those who study Torah, God prepares for them a great inheritance. As it says, La'anchi lo hava yesh. Yesh is the word yesh means yes, there is, which is 310. God will have many, many universes prepared for those who study Torah. And it's all an inheritance. It doesn't say gifting, it doesn't say rewarding or paying. They are called an inheritance. We'll discover soon why. But the idea is the Mishnah is finishing with the concept of an inheritance to those who study Torah. Therefore, Rambam wants to conclude also the category of all the commandments with an inheritance similar to the Mishnah. That's the best answer so far. The Rabbi is going to go way, way deeper into this. Any questions so far? No questions. So again, we have a question. In this week's portion, we read about the laws of inheritance. Rambam, when he lists 248 commandments, positive commandments, the last one is the inheritance. The Rebbe says there must be a reason. You can say, just like the first one is to believe in God for a reason, it's a foundation of all the further coming commandments. The 248th one, the last one, must be a reason. It must be concluding all of the commandments. There are some who answers that this mitzvah applies only after a person's life, and therefore at least at last. Says the Rebbe, it's not true for 2 reasons. And therefore the Rebbe says, let's look at the Mishnah, the foundation of the Torah. Those who complete studying Torah, we read about the reward as an inheritance that God will provide for those who study Torah. Must be inheritance is the conclusion of the study of Torah as a reward for therefore the 248 commandments. The last one is about an inheritance. The Rebbe will go into the Kabbalah understanding. Here it is. It is possible to explain the above by first introducing the following concept. The Rabbi is going to talk about a legal concept in transferring assets from one to the other. How many legal options we have when we transfer one to the other, one property or assets from one to the other? We'll discover three different ways of transferring. It is possible to explain the above by first introducing the following concept. The Torah relates the passage concerning inheritance as a continuation of the concept of the division of Eretz Israel, the Holy Land, into ancestral heritages. In response to the claim of Tzlopchad's daughters, God says, they said, grant us an ancestral heritage together with our father's brothers. God answered, beginning with the word, when a man dies without a son, with regards to the division of Eretz Israel, in addition to the general concept of dividing the land into ancestral heritage, there were three specific concepts involved. When God is teaching about inheritance in this week's portion, he is mentioning three different concepts of transferring assets. Number one, the land of Israel was granted to the nation of Israel as an inheritance and divided into ancestral heritage among the tribe. The first way of transferring the land to people, to families, is an inheritance. An inheritance from who? An inheritance from God. The land belongs to God, and he gives it to us as an inheritance. Number two, it was divided according to the pattern. To the more population tribe, you shall give a larger inheritance, and to the less population tribes, you shall give a smaller inheritance. Another one is a gift, and the gift is given according to the need of the families. So you had a tribe with 60,000 men. They got... Can I help you? Hello, can I help you? I'm sorry. The first one is an inheritance. An inheritance is a gift, an inheritance that came from a giver. The second one is a portion. Portion means according to the size. So you had a tribe with 60,000 men. Simeon tribe had only 24,000 men. They received a much smaller portion, even though an inheritance, pure inheritance, is divided by numbers. In other words, if there are three brothers, they divided all the assets by 4. The oldest gets twice, and the other one, they get each one a quarter, so a quarter and a half. But if you give a land to the tribe of Gad, and a tribe of Joseph, and a tribe of Shimon, one is 70, the other is 40, and another was in 20,000, each one will be receiving a section that is given to him. Now we're talking about a section, not an inheritance. Number 3, specifically by lot, should the land be divided. Ach begoral. After they divided, they would take a lot. The leader of each tribe will stick his hand, and whatever section of the Holy Land came up, his tribe is going to get. And somehow, miraculously, all 3 work together. So inheritance, we understand. Everybody gets a share. 12 tribes should be divided equally by 12. Then God says, no. Larav tarbu v'lame'at tamitu. Those who have a larger number, give them a little bigger portion. And then God says, Ach begorak, all that mentioned in this expression, Ach begorak lichalek et haaretz, meaning cast lots, and each leader must pick one section, one paper, and that paper would tell him which part of the Holy Land. The miracle was that the section in the Holy Land each tribe received was exactly the size and the amount for this tribe. Because you have sections in the Holy Land that are lands that full of rocks, that you, like in the Golan Heights, like in the desert, you cannot plant anything, and farming is the substantial, the most important foundation for life. And then you have a fertile ground, let's say in valleys where all the water come down from the mountains. You have other areas of mountains where you cannot build on, like Judea, in Jerusalem. There are large sections of the land that they cannot build anything, and you cannot use it for anything. Miraculously, everyone got their portion. Some people got a very small portion. Others got a bigger portion. Yes, Ivan?
And also Urim and Thummim was used, right? When it was divided.
They did it in front of the Urim and Thummim, and the Goral spoke. In other words, when the leader, but we don't want to get there. We want to talk about the three types of gifts that God gave the people entering the Holy Land.
It jumped up into the hand.
Huh?
The paper jumped up into the hand.
And spoke.
By the way, was Yehuda the largest tribe?
Yehuda was what?
Was it the largest tribe of Yehuda?
I like to say that Dan, even though he had one son, Hushim, I think he had the largest. But you can see it in the Torah. I know that I read this week that Shimon was the smallest because 24,000 men just died. You see, the entire tribe is like 24,000. Levi was smaller probably, but Shimon was very small.
Levi was not given a share.
Levi did not get a share, correct. It is possible, the implication is that in particular, there are three ways through which the connection between the Holy Land and the Jewish people is expressed. A, as heritage, a gift, an inheritance that God gave us. B, a division according to logic. To a more popular tribe, you give more. And C, a division according to a lottery. So you have a connection with the Holy Land, and that will reflect a connection with God in three ways. Wise as a heritage. Second is like giving them according to their common sense. And the third is lottery. It is possible to say that the reason why all three ways of division were necessary is that the giving of the Holy Land to the nation of Israel as an everlasting heritage involved more than simply transferring and allocating plots of the land to the people. Eretz Israel is God's heritage, and the eyes of God are always focused on it from the beginning of the year until the end of the year. Therefore, it was appropriate that it be given specifically to the Jewish people, for they too are the inheritance of God and intrinsically bound up with him. Thus, our sages say, the Holy One, blessed be he, declared, let Israel, who became my portion, inherit the land that became my portion, granting the Holy Land, God's inheritance, to the nation of Israel, thus reveals and expresses the Jewish people's bond with him. And the rabbi goes on to explain those three things, and I want to get to summarize them because we're not going to be able to go into details. The rabbi is going to share with us that when I give you something, there are three ways in which I can give them to you. The first one is a sale. I sell you something. I get something in return. You give me money, you give me your dog, you give me your boat, you give me a gold coin, and I give you a piece of land. That's simple. A second type is a gift. In a gift, I do get back. The Gemara tells us that if the person did not please me, I would have never given him a gift. When I give somebody a gift, it's because I received something from him. Even though it's not tangible and we're not negotiating, sometimes the gift is greater than what I got, sometimes it's less, it doesn't matter. But a gift requires a giver and a recipient. Just like a sale of something, there has to be two minds that come together and both agree. He agrees to give it to me and I agree to acquire it. A gift is the same thing. If someone gives me a gift and I refuse it, I have no responsibility. If someone gives me a wild ass or a wild dog and I don't want that gift, I'm not responsible for that animal. The owner is still responsible. You can't gift somebody unless the recipient is willing to accept it. These are the first two. The third one, on the other hand, an inheritance, you are not transferring anything. It is that the heirs stand instead in the same spot of the giver. And therefore, there is no need to acquire. If you give me a gift, I have a big birthday, I turn 25, and you give me a nice gift, and I refuse the gift, I don't own the gift, and it's not mine. If someone takes it, it's his. Same is about selling. If you try to sell me something, how many times you walk through in a shuk in Israel, and the guys try to shove it into you so you should buy it from them? I'll never forget, as a child, there were people selling balloons. My parents couldn't afford it, but the men would see 4 children, you'd force us to take the balloons. And my father would fight him to give it back because he had no money. And the guy, no, you have to. You cannot force someone to buy something. However, inheritance, you don't even need to ask from the children or the legal heirs. It may be a brother, it may be a father, to acquire it. Why? It goes automatically to them. Because the inheritance, the idea of that we study in this portion, inheritance is that the heirs stand in the same spot of the giver, the gifter, so to say. That's why God wanted to have 3 types of transferring. I'm sharing it very quick, very simple. Before the Torah was given, after the Torah was given, and the time of Mashiach. Before the Torah was given, it was like buying and selling. You obey me, I reward you. There was no covenant with God yet. The forefathers, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, served God. They are Merkava. They are totally nullified to God. And God called them children. As Rabbi points out, in Egypt, God called the Jewish people, Bni Bchori Israel, my son. They were his children, but the relationship was by choice. The Jew needed to agree, and God was willing to accept. So like a sale, where you have 2 parties where both come to an agreement. When God gave us the Torah during our time now, our relationship with God is like giving a gift. Once we made a bond with God, we pleased him. Making a covenant with God is the greatest gift we gave God, and therefore God in return says, I will provide all you need, I'll give you everything you want. But we need to be willing to accept that. And that's the idea of Naaseh v'Nishma, where on Mount Sinai we say we're willing to accept. When it comes to the time of Mashiach, however, when we'll be elevated to such great level, we are going to be there instead of God. We are going to represent God openly. All along, while we are in exile, godliness is concealed. You don't see God. So who are we? We receive a gift from God, God's blessings, God's name, God's land, God's wisdom. All that God gifted us, and therefore we receive it. We are willing to accept the gift. It's way beyond what we can afford to pay. Therefore, it's considered a gift. When Mashiach will arrive, it will not be a gift anymore. It will be an inheritance. We will be elevated to such a level where we stand instead of God. Everybody looking at a Jew will point out and says, this is God, there is God. Because our behavior will all inclusively be according to God's way. Now we understand why the Holy Land had to be given to the Jewish people in all 3 ways. One, like sale, where each one gets a portion as a gift, as a sale. Then everyone according to the size of the tribe, that's called a gift. And then there has to be an inheritance, because our bond with God has to apply in all 3 cycles. Says the Rebbe, and that's a summary, says the Rebbe, that's why Rambam concludes all the commandments with the idea of inheritance. Not because it happens after our lifetime, it doesn't. It's the court's responsibility. Simply because it's the cumulative accumulation of all our doing will reach to the point of Mashiach, bringing Mashiach, revealing God here, and making sure that the entire universe can point out and say, this is God. A Jew that walks around is God. And therefore we stand on the same spot of God, just like the children who inherit their father or mother, they stand in their stead and they continue on what they were set to create. And therefore we become God's heirs. And that's why in this week's portion, when we read about and this is one point I skipped, but now we can understand. The law of inheritance begin if a man will have a state, ubein ein lo, and he has no children, then you give his inheritance to his father. And if he has no father, you give the inheritance, the share to the brothers. And one can ask, you want to teach us about inheritance, talk about a father who has children. Why do you start with a story where in this expulsion, uben ein lo, that he has no child? What do you mean? Why do you start with this? And the answer is because the idea of inheritance is not about the children, it's about the father himself, the man itself. And it's expressed more in a situation where there is no son. Because when we talk about God and us, we are the only children, and we stand to continue what the father is doing or had achieved. And therefore, and that's why Rambam will conclude the law of inheritance, the entire 248 positive commandments. Now we can understand why in this expulsion, the idea of sharing or receiving a lot in the Holy Land goes in both ways, a gift, a sale, so to say, each one according to the level, and the third one, an inheritance. And that's the conclusion of our study for this week. Thank you very much for following.